Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who I treated like my own flesh and blood until he betrayed me.
Tim Longo. Yeah, sorry about that betrayal.
You were like a son to me, like my own son.
Well, when you don't tell me what the situation is ahead of time and be honest with me and then manipulate me and then only reveal after the fact that I'm your son, or you almost your might as well be, that's really, what do you expect? What do you expect to get from that? Like, that's just, you're a terrible father. So
that's a terrible father figure.
My father was probably,
your real father was also pretty bad in that in this extended analogy.
Daddy issues.
Yeah, some real, you might say some big daddy issues.
Yeah, there we go, folks. We're done we can close this one down.
We've covered BioShock now.
The whole theme of everything is the big daddy issues. We're done. Yep. Yeah. We just need confirmation that that's true, that that's actually the thesis of the whole thing.
This section, we had a little less overlap because last week you had actually played a little further. You had played through the Artemis Suites section, which is where you get the second half of the formula. There's a lot about Suchong in this whole section, both because of he developed a lot of these plasmids, and first he was working for Fontaine, and then he was working for Ryan. So he's a character that gets to develop over kind of more time in story time. You get this. There's a good audio log of him getting whacked by a big daddy. It's when he's trying to figure out how to make them want to protect the little sisters, and he finally gets annoyed with them enough that he goes after he smacks her away or something like that, and the big daddy charges him and you hear him die on tape. That's an interesting thing, but you get this whole extended thing, and it's also ties him into history again with World War II stuff, and I don't know, it's quite a extended character, a little bit maybe too yellow Peril-y for my he's a very
I actually literally just looked him up, and luckily he is a Japanese voice actor, but
playing a Chinese character, I believe,
right, but also then doesn't seem to naturally have that accent, so at least he's not a white dude doing the character. But I think we talked about it probably last episode or a few episodes. It's like that. There's definitely plenty to point at.
Yeah. On the other hand, it fits, right? This is a pulp story, right? And a pulp, the characters are pulp archetypes, right? I mean, that's Fu Manchu, right? So it totally works for the setting. I mean, in as much as those things work, right? I mean, it's not without its problems, obviously. I mean, just because I would not argue that
because it's 2007 or whatever it is, right? It's like, that's where it's more for, and I think on the gender side of things is also, there's definitely some rough, but anyway, I mean, there, it's the whole we're going to lean into what we're doing and not be apologetic about it. And it's like, oh, okay, you do you. But, but anyway,
there's a lot of that. I mean, I think that's just kind of how it does everything, right? Like we talked about last time, is everything's kind of pretty broad and pulling on lots of different things, right? And when you do that, not all of it, I guess, is going to stick. And so I mean, the thing you said in pre-show, which is really true and good about this sort of post-Ryan section, all the post-Ryan sections really, because obviously you switch to Fontaine being the focus, is sort of seeing the other side of Rapture, which is, and I feel like
any story with the sort of, you know, the aristocratic kind of side of things is shown, then it's always, you know, I don't know, there's probably plenty of good examples that are not coming to me at this time, but showing, you know, or the only thing that came to my mind was Titanic.
Oh,
you
sure,
know,
yeah.
You know, seeing, I mean, the Titanic being a metaphor
also
for
the
society.
Irish below decks and the
the
wasps above decks.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like a, you know, the ship being a metaphor for society and all of that stuff. And so, yeah, so same thing, you know, I mean, Rapture isn't too dissimilar from a ship in a way, right? Or sort of a micro society. So yeah, so it was neat to see that, and you made a point in pre-show, which you should talk about, of just thematically, sort of showing how Fontaine sort of got the upper hand, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, he is he develops this character Atlas, you know, who is the same character who was talking to you at the beginning. I guess you can, you know, put that shirt back on if you want to portray that role again. And he basically finds a way to turn the lower classes against the upper, right? He uses the fact of their downtroddenness to you know, there's always, you know, people are always, somebody has to do the work, right? You know, when it comes right down to it. And he keys into their disaffectation and just uses that as any demagogue would, right? I mean, he just twists them. You know, there's an interesting storyline in the audio tapes which follows this woman, Diane McClintock, who was Ryan's mistress, also an Irish name, as you know, that's definitely a thing that he keys off on a lot. And I think that's largely because that was one of the first big, you know, immigrant populations in the United States, right? Was the Irish. So that's like a whole thing in our history for those who are not, who are listening and are not from the States. But anyway, so he just is a person who will twist that. You follow Diane McClintock, and she kind of goes from Ryan's mistress to being this, to being in with Atlas. And she kind of goes from being very sort of first sort of naive about the world, and then coming, you know, I guess Ryan dumps her or something, and she ends up coming to Apollo Square and seeing basically the horrible things Ryan's done. You know, you've got people hung and, you know, all of that stuff, some of the stuff we talked about last time, you know, to the point where she joins basically a rebellious group, which is led by Atlas. And she moves to a point of like being committed to this ideology so much that she's happy because they got some Adam, even though they lost 3 people doing it, you know? And it's just, you know, she just goes, she has a whole story. Diane McClintock does much deeper story, in fact, than does the first person character's mother, who appeared earlier, as we mentioned a couple episodes ago. So it's interesting. It's an interesting seeing that at work, and it being not so much about the specifics of the ideology as much as it was, let's, you know, take things to an abstraction, rile people up. You know, whenever people start to think in abstractions, I start to think, okay, they're trying to hide something. they're trying to pull one over when you move to abstractions. So anyway, I thought all of that was pretty interesting to see at play in this game.
Yeah. It's it's funny because I guess to your point, and you kind of alluded to an email that we got from a listener that is going to make, I think, a pretty good point about ideology in general. But it's sort of, before we get there, to support that, I think the concept that, you know, you basically, Atlas is sort of manipulating you and breaking down Ryan as a, you know, as a good leader, basically, right? And kind of deconstructing him, and then the game, and then Fontaine basically as a sort of like trying to be the voice of everyone opposed to Ryan, or being opposed to Ryan, deconstructs himself essentially by the end, and sort of nobody really ends up being, you know, other than maybe Tannenbaum, sort of, but they don't really like lean into that too heavily. And also I started playing 2.
She's also sort of the other side of the coin to Suchong in a way, right?
Yeah, right.
She also was part of that, but kind of broke away and feels badly for her part in it. She sort of was still dealing with her own maybe trauma from the war. Some of that stuff is alluded to earlier. So there's a lot of those kinds of dualities, in the characters that I think is what lends the game a lot of sort of rich narrative texture. I mean, Jasmine Jolene and Diane McClintock are kind of similar in that way, right? They are also duality, 2 mistresses of Ryan's, and how their lives went differently and stuff. It's all wild stuff. So,
yeah, it's rich. Yeah, rich for a shooter, that where you largely have visual storytelling, people over the radio, and radio logs. Right, there's actually quite a bit that you get from that. And playing 2, I so far I'd say that the 2 team, which was largely nobody from the first game's team, seems like, or at least a lot of the people were not on the first game. I'm getting even more right about sort of like because in 2 you get sort of historical radio logs as well, like Ryan and Diana going to the Adonis, which is like a hotel, and like Ryan talking about Diana this and Diana that, and sort of so there's threading even more stuff. You learn more about the history of how Rapture was created, and so anyway, yeah, it's kind of, and it's such a direct sequel that that it's kind of nice to continue in the world, but yeah. Yeah, and I think, the other thing that starts happening in this last section that we played, is as is always the trick with any ending of any game for the most part, is it's like, how are we going to switch it up on them to make the home stretch feel worth it or different or surprising or whatever it is. We talked last time about these sort of random plasmid thing that happens to you, and how Fontaine is sort of manipulating your DNA and messing with you, and that's the quest that we are starting in this, that we were just talking about in Apollo Square, etc. But then the next thing that I totally forgot that occurred is that you basically, okay, so you get to the last level section.
Point Prometheus.
Point Prometheus, right. Point Prometheus. And you're locked out of a section. You actually see Fontaine, who looks essentially like a splicer at the time. And there's a linear sequence. The music ramps up. Again, the music is just wonderful in this game, pretty much top to bottom. And you're kind of following him. Then he locks you out. And then the plan is you need a little sister to help you out. And so Tannenbaum basically says, well, you should become a big daddy so you can, convince a little sister to go with you. And I'm thinking of this as the way I'm playing the character.
I was going to say, how did that play for you? Because, with you being a harvester, not a rescuer, how did that read? I wonder if I should have looked this up, if she has different voice lines to tell you what to do.
I don't.
I feel like there were a couple spots where she alluded to the fact that I was, a good guy.
Maybe.
So I feel like there might be a point where she's, says something like you're using them to your own ends or something like that. You know what I mean?
Maybe. Yeah. I don't remember. I didn't put any notes down. If she did, I didn't. Yeah.
It would have been right at the beginning of the section. So I could definitely imagine losing track of that because. Yeah, especially in having forgotten about this section. It is this part of it anyway. I don't love the part that follows when you're actually with the little sister, but I really do like how this develops the little sisters and how they were made, psychologically and with plasmids, I guess. But there's not a lot about the plasmids. But you see all their little cells. Basically, they live in effectively a cell block with like an open ceiling. They each have their own little, capsule, that they're in.
I mean, it is a cell. It's definitely a cell. It's like,
it's a cell, and the inside, the switch to open the door is much higher than on the outside, which is a nice touch, because they're little. And you also see all the stages of like making the big daddies, from getting candidates, and like they have all the signage, and like and then all the different parts that are made to make them: the diving suit, the diving bell helmet, the bouncer arm, or whatever, the drill or something like that, the rivet gun, the boots,
and the boots. Once you put the boots on, then you get the big bassy footsteps happen.
Clomp,
you're used to hearing when you're seeing them, right? Walking around, and before you fight them, right? So there's sort of there's a fearful connotation to them before you do that, and then you put it on and you hear the same audio. So it's kind of a brilliant switcheroo for the player in a way of becoming it. And the one thing I mean, regardless of that gameplay section that we'll talk about in a second that you mentioned, I do have to hand it to him that, and it goes back to sort of obviously one of the things we've been talking about from the pillar perspective, is just such a fully realized place and fiction and sort of at least character archetypes. And so the fact that it's funny that I forgot about it too, because, you've seen these very unique and different characters in the Big Daddy and Little Sister this whole time. And obviously you've been taking them down, and they're just kind of part of such a big part of the world, to actually fulfill an unspoken promise of actually giving you backstory that's related to your objectives and the story and the level design, that actually is not just in another radio log or something. They could have easily told that story of both of them just through some voice lines and maybe some interactions with Tenenbaum or something, but they didn't. They fully integrate. So you get to see like all these different things through moving through the levels and the objectives you're doing. And that's like true fantasy fulfillment. And then you put the helmet on, and it's like, yes, you don't get to do it for very long, and it's not as exciting as maybe it could be. And that's partially why I wanted to play 2, because I kind of forgot. I had a vague memory that that's what you did in 2, because I'd never played 2. So it's all new to me. But you kind of just, that there is this sort of like, what would it be like if, and I got to give him kudos for actually going that far, because that could totally be something you could see being cut, right? It's like, it's a whole nother mode, and sort of like you got this whole
you're moving slower. We got to rebalance, like, are you going to be able to turn fast enough to, get at the slicers, which I think they do some of that through level design. I think there's a lot more hallways basically, so you can see
it's a lot more
coming for longer.
Too.
Yeah. So, I think all of that sort of contributes to how they approached that problem. As you even the area, even Point Prometheus in the area that before you escort the sister, even those are very like, lots of long hallways. And they don't throw as many of the spider slicers, or at least didn't seem like to me, climbing on the ceiling. There's a couple, but it's not as frequent, I don't think. So it's more of the stuff that's going to kind of come straight at you, the lead heads and stuff. So it's, I think they did a good job of like saying, okay, we need to work within these limitations now. And because of that. And I think that all really works quite well. So fan of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And luckily I forgot about it. So I had a little bit of the simulation of what it would be like playing the game for the first time in that regard. Obviously it came quickly back to me when I realized what the objective was, but just imagining playing back when it did come out, right? And the sort of the revelation of like, oh man, I'm going to get to be one of these things for a short time. And what's more, especially playing the villain as I am, escorting one of them, right? Where they're trusting you and you're like, now it's a mini escort mission, and there's that weird sort of awkward betrayal in a way, and the sort of gravity of that, the fact that they would, because even, having companion AI is not easy to do. And Obviously, it's a very linear section, so it's probably very scripted. But again, switching the perspective on something you've seen throughout the whole game is a very, very memorable, iconic duo of these two.
Yeah.
And then you swapped it, and now, you see through the eyes of one of these things, and you watch the little girl do what the little girl does. And super, super kudos on going all the way with that, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I love. I mean, that's a good way to put it. Is like changing perspective. You're literally going into the Big Daddy's perspective, and at the very beginning of the game, I mean, it balances nicely against the beginning of the game where you're seeing them like in front of you, like when you're kind of woozy and half unconscious when you're getting that first plasmid, you're seeing them walking in front of you, and then you see the next kind of major beat is when they interact in in that stage area. Remember, there's like a splicer that goes after a little sister in there. They basically establish what the Big Daddies do, because before that you hadn't seen them.
Yeah,
it's in that catwalk area. You walk across the top and they drop down. So it's like you've been seeing this at weird perspectives, even like at the very beginning, and now you're seeing sort of from the weirdest perspective which is literally inside the helmet. Very cool idea. And pays off on a, like, if they hadn't done it, you might not have noticed, but there is sort of an implicit promise in those choices early, right? That if you think about it that way, right? So it's cool.
No, I think it's true. If they hadn't done it, I don't think we would have thought about it that much, because both characters are largely seen kind of, essentially seen as enemies. I mean, right. You can save the little girls, of course, but the Big Daddies are definitely.
But you can photograph them.
Bosses.
You can photograph them like enemies,
Yeah, and so, there aren't many games where there's an expectation where you play as an enemy, right? Especially a mini boss. You just assume they're mini bosses, so it's like, well, that's just it. So it's just and I'm sure there's examples before this game that we can pull to where you have a similar motif happening, but and then it's just also very weird because I literally just picked up 2 right after finishing 1, so like I'm now in a different headspace, even more of a different headspace because of what they do in that game. But just pretty impressed with that section. But then why don't you talk about some of your frustration with the escort mission specifically, though, that section?
Yeah, I don't love. So first of all, I'm not sure the goal makes a lot of sense. Like, I think the goal here, and I'm not even sure what motivates why the little sisters need to go extract a little more Atom. Like, I don't get that. I just, like, that doesn't connect to me at all. Like, I don't know why we have to do this thing. Like, concretely speaking, like, what I mean is basically, exactly. What I mean is basically, I have to do this because they have to pay off on me being a Big Daddy to have me escort a little sister, and this is what the little sisters do, right? Is basically what it feels like, and it's not. Yeah, it's to get me through, I guess, a bunch of doors that only they can go through, but also I'm a Big Daddy now. Like, I've seen these things crush through walls. Like, it's just, I don't know, none of it makes.
Which ironically, there's a scripted event in that section where one comes through a wall.
Exactly.
And you fight that one later. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just,
that's a good point.
Weird.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I don't love the motivation. Yeah. It feels very forced. It feels very strange. And then the actual play of it is a little stress making in the sense of, like, first you're trying to, the little sister has a health meter, so you're trying to keep her alive, which I guess, again, makes sense because now you're in the role of the Big Daddy and that's kind of your job. But then, like, if that one dies, it's just like, oh, you can get another one. And it's like, really? It's like, that also seems against the whole, like, I mean, she does say, like, it's a tragedy to lose even one or something like that. I mean, she says something about it, Tannenbaum does, but it's also just like, yeah, okay, but the play is telling me, that there's a new hole every section. I could just get a bunch of little sisters if, they kept dying in here. So I don't know. There's just there's a lot of stuff that feels very conflicted here, in terms of like what the story wants to do, and how they need to pay off and motivate this. There's choice that they've made, a very cool choice, and so I just feel like that they all feel very at odds to me from like what we know of these creatures and all that stuff. And then the play itself is kind of, it's hard to actually see. It's a very dark section in a lot of it. So it's hard to actually see the enemies coming. And like, so a lot of the play is not very rewarding because if they do get damaged, it's like, well, I couldn't see them. Like, and you're trying to rely on audio, but you're like in a hallway, it's just, I don't know. It just doesn't pay off super well for me. And I don't love that. And I didn't love it at the time. And at the time I remember thinking, oh, I can't let them die. Like I was super paranoid about the little sister. And so I was redoing it again and again and again because they would die, and I'd be like, oh shoot, and I'd reload, having played it more than once at this point, I kind of like, oh, okay, well, I guess I don't have to do that. But at the time, it's not communicated until the little sister dies. So
you assume that you don't want
that, I mean, you've been rescuing them this whole time if you played rescuing them as I did. So it there's a lot just kind of that's very dissonant, I think, in that section.
Yeah. I mean, I'm wondering. For full disclosure, I think I had bumped down before this section started. I had bumped down to easy just because I wanted to barnstorm through, and that's probably why this section didn't frustrate me as much. It just felt like more of a linear, slog or what have you, but something that's occurring to me on hard, like imagining, which I assume you played it on hard at some point.
I have at some point.
I would bet some of the crowd control plasmids come into, like, for instance, the
enrage is helpful,
the decoy, enrage, and just anything to distract them while you're taking them out.
Also, better deployment of like proximity mines and things like that is helpful. I mean, there's lots of turrets and cameras in there, which is also kind of nice because you can get some buddies basically helping you, and in fact, after I lost the little sister, I was like, oh, I'll just go ahead and do all the stuff. Like I just went and did it all before I got the little sister, so I didn't have to worry about her while I did that. Which is kind of against the spirit of the thing, but I have played it, multiple times. I didn't really feel like I had to do it exactly the same way this time. I don't love it.
You're forgiven. You specifically are very, It's funny too, because now I'm kind of regretting playing 2 right away. And I actually played a couple hours of it, I feel like, or at least an hour and a half. And so now I'm sort of conflating the two a little bit too much in my head as we're talking about it. Cause I'm like, because 2 actually is, which you would expect from a sequel, but 2 is a better game. Like I agree. It plays better.
I agree.
And I won't bring up the way they deal with the little sisters for this because we're not talking about 2, but it's interesting to see what they do, how they handle that this time, or for when you're actually playing a Big Daddy the whole time. So so then you were escorting, and then you basically just get through, right? And but I do love the last moment because
when she hands up
I wasn't
the needle.
I don't think I was fully listening to what Tannenbaum was saying until she hands you the syringe. But it's just such a cool, spooky, like weird connection moment with the little girl. She goes up there and turns around and then reaches out and hands you this syringe that you've seen throughout the whole game. They're laying next, they're laying on the ground after you help or harvest every little girl you've met up to this point, blah blah blah, and then she just hands you one, and then Tannenbaum says you need to now extract. So it's like this. There's this whole.
So in a way, you're also becoming a little sister. Right?
Exactly. You're exactly. You've played every role sort of there is to play in Rapture kind of at this point, right? In a way.
Yeah, because you're connected to Ryan and Fontaine as well, right? You're Ryan's son, you're Fontaine's son in a way.
Big daddy issues.
You play the big daddy. Yes. You play the little sister too.
That's the new shirt. Big daddy issues.
No, I don't want my face involved with that in any way. Oh my God.
No, your face wasn't involved with the Ratchet and Clank shirt, so that was okay.
No, but my face was on the Booker, and
yeah, that was good. That was good. I mean, think about how I feel. I mean, but anyway, yeah. And I haven't even played that game, so I'm sure Elizabeth is a badass though. So,
cool. It's a little strange. There's some issues. Anyway, yeah, we don't. We should talk. Well, it's just some weird choices, but we could actually do a bonus.
I was thinking about it, to be honest. I was concerned because I haven't played it, and
we could. I mean, we could just talk about your experience with 2 and my experience with replaying Infinite, because I played quite a bit of it today as well. I also had a bunch of time. This is a day off for us, so
that's true. We could do a double weird.
Just to,
you could tell me your story.
Continuing BioShock, yeah.
And I could tell you, mine. I mean, you've played too, but it's weird to live BioShock Infinite, through hear about it from so many people playing and not having had played it yet. So I know bits and pieces, right? Little things here and there, like Revenge of the Jedi and things like that, where I'm like, what? Really? What is that? And, blah, blah, blah. So it's this weird amalgamation in my head right now, but I do probably, I mean, the thing is like the other thing I looked up in pre-show as we were talking was I looked up, 2K's newish studio, Cloud Chamber Games, which is supposedly working on
on a Shock game. Yeah.
I think they've said something like that, right? So it seems like it's it's in that realm, but so I kind of was like, well, where would you go with this?
I mean, famously, somebody on the board was like, they should put BioShock on the moon. So maybe we're going to finally get that. Or maybe it was a president. I don't remember. It was around 2013, 14 or something like that. They were like, yeah.
You mean a board of 2K or something? 2K.
Yeah. I think at the time somebody was like, yeah, we should just keep cranking those out. There should be one of those every year, and just all over the place.
Got it. Right. Franchise it. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Do what Activision has done with Call of Duty.
Yeah. That's right. They want their Call of Duty. I mean, the thing is, it's such a unique concept, and it relates all the way back to playing 1 like we're doing. It's just such a specific, unique concept. Like that's why I'm really interested to see what they would do with the franchise going forward, because it sounds like, I think appropriately so, Infinite just kind of just jinx right and just goes in another direction in a way. Yeah. And 2 is obviously a
concerned with a lot of the same themes in some ways, about
ideologies and things,
about ideologies and ruling and and conflict, right? Basic society, right?
But I mean, how many times can you do that is my point, right? It's like,
that's
the ideology is so ingrained in the franchise. It's like, okay, go to the moon. And is there another rich white guy up there doing some shenanigans that you got to like take down? I don't know. It's like, I don't know. It's just, what do you, it's so specific.
It is very specific, and it's
Call
really
of Duty
weird.
Is not specific. Call of Duty
exactly
is general. And so you can do whatever the hell you want, but
it would be hard to imagine just constantly like cranking one out every year. Because like I remember when they showed at E3 the Infinite trailer, and there was I think they're called something like Mr. I haven't gotten to one of them yet. It's like Mr. Handy or something like that. I can't remember the. It's not Mr.
Oh
Handy,
yeah, I vaguely remember. It's like
but
sort of
the dude with the big gloves and he's
big
like
daddy equivalent.
Exactly, and it's like, does that have to always be there? Right? It's if you were going to put this out every year you're going to come out with another concept for the weird. Yeah, automaton-ish thing. Like, is that part of it?
Oh,
and it feels like it is. So yeah.
What else? Because
plus plasmids and
yeah, right. Oh, do they have plasmids in Infinite?
They're called vigors, but they're plasmids. Yeah, they're the same thing.
Yeah. Well, so it's like, yeah, I mean, there's lots of places you could go, and if you're really creative with it, I'm sure they can do some fun stuff. I'm more just saying, BioShock 1, as we've talked about for this whole series, is a revelation in so many ways, and it's so specific, and it was very successful and a bit of a sleeper hit and blah blah blah, but also just very pure in concept. And I think, as Brett and I both know, like, as we all know, games are business as well. And when you have a hit like that, you can't not, I mean, executives, and I'm not trying to, I'm not pointing fingers at executives. I think if I were in their shoes with their jobs, probably would have the same thoughts, but it's like, you can't just let something like that go. Right. Artistically, in my opinion, you should, but really from a business standpoint, you can't. So it's like, okay, what do you do? And at least in Infinite's case, they tried to sort of veer off course a little bit, and it's still kind of in the wheelhouse, it sounds like. 2 is a very direct sequel, it looks like. And for me, it's like, I just like going back to Rapture and see more of it, and kind of what did they do 10 years later kind of thing. A little forced, like the story overall for 2 seems pretty forced, and why I'm back there, etc. But like a third game, it's like, you really, you might as well go to the moon. It seems like, just do it. In fact, it seems like almost hilarious if they were to, because that executive said that. It's like, oh yeah, well, you know what? We're going to go to the moon. And it's like, but I don't know. Anyway, it's such a fascinating world and franchise, and it's sort of like, it's also, because Rapture is so specifically represented in this game. It's not like, it's not like Star Wars or something where it's more of a universe, because it's really like, it's about this place, this event that happened in this specific place. It's not like the rest of the world was in a different, maybe in Infinite they established that the rest of the world was in a weird state where you could go to any city and have wacky shit happen, but oops, sorry.
It's okay.
But anyway, yeah. So, I don't know. So I guess, we get the syringe to get back on track, which I did think was an interesting moment, for me at least. And then you just go directly there, right?
Straight to fighting Fontaine. I mean, she literally says you can't go back, at this point. It's a very like Metroid moment of like, beyond this point, you won't be able to return. So she's very clear about that. And it even gives a message, I think, as you're going up in the elevator, like, you're not going to be able to save, and you'll just have the stuff that's on you. And it's like, well, now you tell me. But and then it saves, I guess, as you get out of the elevator. I actually managed to, it was almost the perfect play of this boss. Like, I think I got down to like, I had maybe one more health thing left. I might not have had any left when I put the final plunge in him. The boss fight is, not honestly great. I mean, there are some features in it that, on paper, it all makes sense. I see how they got to where they are. It's like, okay, he goes through basically various immunities, and so you want to, like, that's a player test of like, have you been paying attention, like that, if he's got fire, he's going to be more or less immune to fire, and you should switch to something else. And but I'm at that point, and then he's got like a chart, like he runs at you, so he'll shoot a ranged attack. If you're close, he'll hit you, and he'll charge you after his ranged attack, basically. So he does a few things, and anytime you knock him down, he goes back to the well of Adam that he's been, pumping himself full of, and you go, and that's when you use the needle to withdraw the Adam. If you don't get to him while he's up there, by the way, he just, jumps back down with, his health back. In any of those phases.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I probably,
I missed one. Yeah. Well, if you were playing, if you had bumped it down to easy, you wouldn't have, but I ended up, having like half a bar of health left, and I don't think any more first aid kits. So it was like,
it was pretty nail biting.
It was down to the wire, and it was good. And I was like, I think I'm gonna have to do it again, because I couldn't remember if he was gonna jump down again. But no, with the fourth, he doesn't have another phase after that, and then it goes straight to the outro. I don't think we need to spend a ton of time talking about the boss battle itself.
No, I mean, it's very basic. Yeah. And, I do remember from the first time playing and this time, the same feeling of, I didn't feel, I think we talked about this actually when we went last episode, or I guess would have been last episode where we talked about the transition from Ryan to Fontaine. But I just don't think Fontaine was built up enough, for the ending. He's he's kind of a vacant villain, for lack of a better term. And they definitely tried hard in the remaining time they had since Ryan to boost him up so you cared, but it just didn't land again for me this second time. And by the time you're there and you see this sort of very weird hulking naked dude, and I think, like you said, you said it well. On paper, I can see how they got there, but I just think it just doesn't quite land, unfortunately.
What's funny is he actually reminds me of the I guess you would say Promethean in the movie Prometheus. The
totally.
Alien prequel. He's bigger than, other human beings, and kind of that pale. I actually rewatched that this weekend. It was on service that I have. I was curious, how is that? I actually think it's not a bad movie.
It's not terrible.
It's not a great movie by any means. It's not as good as Alien or Aliens, but I think it's fine. I think he's trying different stuff, and the visuals are fantastic. I mean, it's really good, interesting looking movie. Anyway, that's a total side note, but the Prometheus connection I could not let go because I'm me. So I mean, I
Prometheus
I just think,
also being a nice connection.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, also what he looks like, but also just the word. Because it's point Prometheus. The thing I think that maybe undercuts this is you're still getting more of Ryan's story after Ryan has died. So, I think that that's some room where they might have been able to do more with Fontaine. Maybe if Fontaine had been able to play with you more than he is, first he's taking down your health and then you get the weird plasmid thing. Well, actually, that's just you recovering, I guess. But, he's like, you ditched the spell or whatever, or, you broke the spell or whatever he says. And
I think, I think for me, I think in retrospect, I'm pretty sure I got at least 80% of the radio logs, but I think what I was thinking about after finishing is that Fontaine wasn't dealt with enough during the Atlas the rest of the game where Atlas was dominant. They mention Fontaine here and there, as a character, but they don't really pit what I feel like I would have liked more is to really pit Fontaine and Ryan against each other during that time. And Atlas was just sort of this revolutionary figure that's a third, and because
I mean he's there mostly in the setting, I think, and I think it is maybe
he's
a little too subtle.
He's there for sure.
He's the one who's importing Bibles for the lower classes and all this stuff. So it all ties in with the stuff that's later, but it's also just it's not very direct, and there's not as much in the audio. He's basically just a criminal, right?
They don't boost him up enough. He needs, and I'm sure they were trying to be careful with how to balance that with Atlas, because they needed the twist to land. You didn't want there to be conflict between Fontaine and Atlas, right? Of wait, this other guy is sort of is against Ryan, but Atlas is also against Ryan. So I can see the conundrum there, and I'm not saying I could have done a better job, but I think the missing piece for me was, the abruptness of the Fontaine Ryan switcheroo. Once Atlas had become Fontaine, I guess it's who's this Fontaine guy, and then he ends up being a boss too. And the funny thing is, playing 2, I'm actually learning a little bit more about the history between Fontaine and Ryan, and sort of Fontaine's, I guess, investments in plasmids and all this sort of other stuff.
Right.
So, but you don't have that in 1. So,
Well, a little bit, but not much. I mean, he's got Fontaine Futuristics, which is his plasmid company, and
right.
That's in this area with the where you get all the gear, because he basically was Suchong's first boss, and then Ryan was his second boss, I guess, is something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and they're talking about. So basically, it's like, there's sort of like, I don't know, industrial espionage type stuff, which is just not. It's exciting.
Hard to. It's hard. Yeah, it's like trade blockades. It's hard to really land.
It's hard to relate.
About.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's because capitalism is often so boring that's why it's hard to make the villain that it should be. All right, well let's turn to takeaways, unless you have anything else. Oh, we should talk about the
we
gotta
talk about
movie. Movie, the little movie ending. I think our takeaways will be pretty quick because I think we pretty much hit them again and again. But so I got the good ending again this time. I don't know if I feel like I've seen the bad ending. I should have watched it again this time. It's just the two endings, and it's, did you save them all or not is the question, the binary. Did you save all the little sisters? I mean, not all. You don't have to. I just mean, all the ones that you encountered, did you rescue them? Not that you had to have gotten all the ones in the game or anything like that, though that's not hard to do. Or did you harvest one or more? So that's the binary. So tell me a little bit about the so-called bad ending. It sounds like it's a little abrupt.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I can also see how they got there, but there's enough sort of I don't know, rhetoric is the right word to use, but there's enough rhetoric around the little sisters to, I think, for some people, I guess sort of just, there's a few people in the game that talk about how they're sort of goners, that they're too far gone. And yes, ultimately, if you played both sides, or you knew that that's not actually the case, then you would understand that you're a monster for doing it. But in the ending, basically what ends up happening is, the voice lines that Tenenbaum says, something about like, I knew that, I knew what you were all along, how bad you were. And then they give you the keys to the city, or the key to the city off of Fontaine. And then you essentially launch a splicer attack on a submarine that is basically cleaning up the plane crash, maybe, that's up above, as they're trying to find survivors. And the splicers take over the submarine. And basically the implication is that you have taken over and you are now the new villain, after Ryan, after Fontaine, it's now you, and you're taking, you're leaving
like
Rapture.
Fathers like son.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So you're the big daddy now. And the sub is a nuclear sub. And so you get a missile out of it, at least one, and sort of, there's a vague implication that you leave Rapture with splicers, with this sub, to take over the world. I don't know, like do something. You become a baddie beyond Rapture, basically, and you're the new villain, because you're such a monster that you took out all the little sisters. So it just was like, I guess what didn't quite hit for me in that one, and I think the good ending is much better, is the sort of like the record scratch of like how, like, the fact that you become such a villain, like a world dominating kind of villain, that it kind of goes to 11 very quickly. And I guess I didn't think it fully through.
It goes from I'm putting these creatures out of their misery to I'm a power hungry monster who wants to take over the world.
Yeah.
Which is a big step. That's a long way to go. I mean, I think it's clear in the game that you can. I mean, the verb is harvest versus rescue, right? I mean, the game is pretty clear about what you're doing. I think even if they don't, even if people are saying they can't come back, Fontaine's like that, saying that and things like that. But So it is.
And I guess
you're basically ascribing characteristics to the player that aren't really justified by the story.
Well, and to your point, I guess at the end of the day, they're really trying to punish you for being so bad, right? It's like, and that's fine.
To heighten the monstrosity.
It's like, oh, by the way, you might have thought you were getting away with it, but you didn't. You are the villain, so you're not going to get away with it. It's not like you can kind of get off easy. It's like, no, you chose the bad path. And so we're going to prove that to you.
You're going to rule the world. Yeah.
Yeah. So
see how you got punished, sir.
Yeah. There's a kind of a neat moment though in that cinematic where in the good ending, there's the one bathysphere comes up and all the little girls which we'll talk about in a second. You can go over it. But in the bad ending, like 40 bathyspheres all pop up
that's cool.
at the same time. And out of them come all the splicers. And then they kind of take out all the naval soldiers and crew. And so it's sort of like an interesting, juxtaposition with those. But I did go back and watch the good ending, but yeah, what was your take on the good ending?
Yeah, I do actually think the good ending is genuinely rewarding and ties in really well to what you've been doing. If you rescue the sisters,
I love it.
It basically says, you gave them these opportunities to have lives. And it reminds me a little bit, it's funny, because it's pretty contemporaneous. I don't remember exactly one, but it reminds me a little bit of 6 Feet Under and how that show ended.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Where it's like these lives happened. And then at the end of it, Jack, the player character, he's there to see them go to college or get married or have children, and it's not, these are very simple scenes. It's like a hand, a woman's hand receiving a diploma, a woman's hand getting a ring slipped on, a woman's hand reaching down to a smaller hand. So it's extremely simple. And I actually think that's a lot of its power, like that they're not trying to do a lot with this. And then at the end, it's Jack's hand, a very aged hand. He turns it over, palm up, so you can see the chain. And all of their hands reach out to him in his death. And it's just pretty remarkable thing to do, at the end of a game like this, at the end of this violent shooter to show, this human connection that he's forged, which is pretty cool. And, Tenenbaum talks about it, there's narrative basically to explain what's happening. It's like, you took I thought you were going to leave them here in Rapture, but you took them up, you gave them something I couldn't, in a life. And it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool sequence.
Yeah. And I think the last sentence she has talks about family and the family's a big theme. And I think she says something about how, you gave them something.
That's what they gave
Yeah.
Jack. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty poignant. And yeah, in the grand scheme of things for a game like this, that is like not, subtle
yeah,
or whatever. Right. Like it was, I think, of the two endings, I think it's quite, as short as it is, it still has some good gratification. So
yeah, for sure. All right, well, let's turn to some takeaways. We'll try to zip through these pretty quick because we do want to get to a little bit of feedback and stuff. I think we will actually just kind of next week do some more talking about this. It'd be a fun bonus thing to do is talk about later BioShocks just a little bit. I might have some time to play a little bit of 2. It wasn't that long ago I played through it, so I think I remember a lot of it anyway, but I am
surprised at how much they changed, to be honest. Like I thought it was going to be pretty much like just more of the same, but there's mechanically and some interesting stuff that they did. So
yeah. All right. Well, let's turn to takeaways at the end of a series. We like to actually, before we do that, I should quickly do my book recommendation.
Oh yeah.
So, I tried to think about a book that really, was personally impactful that I think really, gets at a lot of what this game's getting at. And so, of course, I reread Ayn Rand's Fountainhead. I just felt like, oh no, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was just going to joke and say the Fountainhead, but
the mystery dip suggested I should try to pull one over on you, but I can't even do it. No, actually, I thought of a book I read last year by an economist who actually died last year. That's how his work was pointed out to me. He had written an essay called, and so I'm going to have to bleep me out too. His essay and then the book was Bullshit Jobs. This is David Graeber. And the reason why I'm mentioning this book as my pairing is that a lot of what this book is about, first of all, I knew I was going to love the book because he basically, the very first thing he says is basically there are, a couple different types of jobs in the world. There's people that if, their job disappeared and that job was no longer being done, you'd miss it. So that's like garbage men, nurses, doctors, whatever. Us, game developers, artists, all kinds of stuff. It kind of goes through all this. So already I'm going to love this book. And those that you wouldn't, which is like corporate lawyers, or, whatever. But just like a lot of the kind of, it's a whole thing. But the reason why I'm bringing it up, it's a little bit more approachable than his other books that I've read, including Debt: The First 5,000 Years, which I think is an excellent book, but it is dense. So that's why it's not the one I'm recommending. This one's kind of fun in this way, but it also talks a lot about how capitalism is supposed to be so efficient, but it's sort of not, because we're human. There's a lot about like how these jobs kind of grow and multiply because bosses like to have fiefdoms, where they, there's kind of a pissing match going on because who has more, reports or whatever, in the hierarchy. So there's a whole lot of interesting points that he makes through multiple chapters. He took this kind of essay, 3,000 word essay or whatever, and developed it into a full book. A really interesting, fun read. Just read the essay if you don't want to spend the time on the book, but it's a fun one. So anyway, that is my book recommendation to tie in with BioShock. And R.I.P. David Graeber, who was also involved in the Occupy Wall Street movement. So that's it's a kind of it was kind of an interesting character, and I didn't know anything about him until last year when he died. So I read a few of his books. So anyway, let's go to takeaways. Takeaways. You take it away, sir. Take it away with a takeaway.
Yeah, I do think these are going to be fast because I think we've hit them so many times. But my first one, I just wrote as a first-person shooter with the heart of an immersive sim. And again, we've talked about it ad nauseum. They have said themselves, that they weren't setting out to make sort of they weren't taking System Shock 2 or Thief or some of those others that we know is in the lineage here and making it more of a first person shooter. They were starting more with like, we want to make a good first person shooter and we're going to have some elements of an immersive sim. And so I think that is like, as far as like a goal goes and a takeaway goals, like pillars go, they definitely succeeded at that because it is not, it does not check boxes for me. As a quick aside, the other game that I actually just started up was Dishonored 2, which I had never played. And so I'm playing that and BioShock 2 at the same time, as well as finishing this one. So I have this very clear juxtaposition of a pretty modern immersive sim type game in Dishonored 2 and then BioShock. And I know now, it's like I mentioned with Prey, I know what I'm missing. But all that being said, they were successful at making a competent shooter in that way. And that clearly was one of their key goals. So they achieved that. But what's your next? What's your first one?
Yeah. I meuld kind of take that and kind of put like ease of use, right?
Sure,
to some degree on it,
the
of like
reasoning.
This left trigger, right trigger for these two different sorts of powers, and the L1 R1 for switching between the things of them. Like a lot of this stuff feels really, really balanced and well thought through, in terms of how it works and how it maps. The mappings change a little bit for Infinite, but not a lot. I mean, it's pretty much the same thing. There's like a couple like jump is here or something like that or whatever. I don't know. I'm not even sure you can crouch. I don't love the crouch in the first BioShock. So if there's a way to crouch in Infinite and I haven't found it, I'm not missing it. But I think that frictionlessness was a really, really important thing for the game, to really like bring this kind of, very, very thin. Yeah, it's a really good action game. And it also brings in those elements of like having all these sort of different systems in play. They're just, they don't go all the way to being an immersive sim like we've talked about. So I think that although I miss that, I think it was a really important step to take and give people a taste of that, so they can go and find the Praise and Dishonored's and even some of the older titles, if they want to, if they want more of that. But they're putting in like damage types and things like that, but it's all just kind of very friction free, and that I think is really, really important. So I would definitely put that in mind for sure, which I think goes along well with yours. How about a second one from you?
This one's a bit of a catch-all, but I basically put it down as a fully achieved sense of place and sound. I added the and sound on there because I still think the audio design and composition is more than 50% of this experience. And as we often use the phrase, audio is 50% of the experience, when I think in this case, like for me at least, it goes beyond, but it all kind of packages up to, they chose a very specific place that was very unique, very different. And because they knew, they were so clear on what the identity of this setting was and the context and how it will relate to the narrative, which is my third one, that they were able to really achieve a sense of clarity there that very few franchises, I think, are able to, or very, very few games are able to do, because it was just so specific, and everybody on the team seemed to really know what they were going for, in whether it be the Art Deco or whether it be, the late 50s, early 60s, like all these sort of elements came together very, very purely, I thought. And, or the sort of like, I don't know, Baroque aspect of everything, and even in the character designs, and it's just a very cohesive sense of presence, for everything. So, that was definitely it's still going to continue, I think, to be one of the best examples in gaming where we can point to something and say, they nailed that, they really knew where they were, and fulfilled that.
Yeah, in partnership with that, I think I would say mine would be basically along the lines of high production values, and I would especially call out audio for that. Playing the last section of it, this morning, and really kind of specifically paying attention to like all the ways the audio was contributing to the experience, is and how much it communicates about the world around you. So like you don't even need to see things to know that they're there, to know that you can look for them, such as the machines, like the Circus of Values or what have you, or the gun one, the ammunition dump machine, or et cetera. I mean, like you just know those things are there. All of that is there. The production quality is consistent across the board throughout the game. We talked a lot about with the first God of War, which is a couple of years before this, the sort of way that had the right pixel density, across across the whole title, despite this kind of wide variance in sizes of things and things like that, especially in a couple later titles, I think, in that series. But here it feels very similar in that way. Like they found exactly the right level of detail that they could deliver on. Of course, I'm playing, a remaster or whatever, but it was true at the time as well, that they really nailed what could work. And they, the art direction, I think, was fantastic. All of the choices they made about setting and all of that, I think, really help all of that. But you still have to do the work, you still have to deliver that. And I think they absolutely do. So, every pickup or whatever feels like there's something visually interesting about it, or it's been fully modeled out and it makes sense. And I don't know, it's just a million things that contribute to this sense of production quality or production value. But it's really just everything. It's polished. It's really, really polished. And I think that's really great. So,
yeah.
Got a final one for me? I know you do, because you kind of...
Yeah, I mean, it obviously has to do
with... out earlier.
Yeah, it has to do with the narrative, and I just describe it as sort of the macro narrative. They took their macro narrative and went to the hilt with it, and also rare, like, and the reason I put it as macro narrative versus even like plot or any other sort of descriptor is because, like, it's not perfect, as we talked about, but it's so good. It gets so close. And I put Portal also in this category of, there isn't necessarily an overt plot for the most part, like not a deep plot, right? There is technically one. You're going to take down these folks. That's really the plot. But there's so much sort of like universe building and narrative around what has happened, and you're uncovering all of that stuff. And then, obviously the twist that happens is so memorable, and it's very difficult to do that stuff. Yeah. And to actually pay it off. Would you kindly, like we talked about, is a mantra in, at least for game developers, but it's for gamers as well. It's like the cake is a lie. And there's few of those. We have few of those that somebody could say to another gamer, and you're like, oh yeah, you're nodding at each other. You're like, yep, yep. Well, yeah, I remember that. And they just sort of beautifully orchestrated this sort of narrative that is like, it's a web of stories, right? It's not just one story. It's a web of all these different characters and radio logs and how they all intertwined around these events that happened. And you're kind of putting all the pieces together, and you're getting each nexus on the web, bit by bit, and you're kind of putting this whole thing together. And they nailed that. And it's, I think, one of the more memorable aspects of the game because of it. And everything, part of the additional way that they were able to achieve that sense of place that I was talking about was because the narrative also was part of that achievement, and it worked all well with that stuff. So yeah, just an amazing, I don't know, narrative web, to sound cheesy.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think what I would go to, because obviously I also think the narrative is amazing, but I don't want to retread that. But I definitely agree with all of what you've said. I think you had mentioned this being a generous game, and I think that it is. That's something I really love about games. It's not generous in the sort of way I normally mean it, but I do think it is very generous with all of its narrative, with how all of its production design ties together, but also just it's very generous in terms of, this is not meant to be the world's greatest challenge game, right?
No.
It is giving you all the tools you need. It that detracts from the simness that we talk about, but it's in service of greater accessibility and greater, like, hey, you want, if you love the shotgun, you can play the game with the shotgun and have the same experience. You have a stun locker, ammo and et cetera. Right. So it's like, it's always delivering across its axes in terms of what you can do to enemies, with basically any of the tools you want to use, and then it has some a few that are kind of weird enough, be it like the enrage, or, maybe trapping up an area with the crossbow trap darts or whatever. I mean, like there are weirder ways to play the game if you want to. But in general, it's like, hey, pick a couple of weapons you like, and get to know them pretty well, and you'll always have ammo for them. Like I was never really running low, and if you want, hey, buy some more. Like, I mean, it's just like it's not going to put any barriers in your way. Yeah, it's extremely forgiving. Which I definitely appreciated about it this time. Kind of looking at it more analytically, like, why did this really connect? And I think that's another reason why it really connected. If it had been a really difficult game or a really deep simmy game, despite the attractiveness of Rapture and sort of like the narrative threads, I think it would have been a tougher sell, and it might not have connected with the larger audience that it did. So
yeah,
I think mission accomplished on that. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, playing, I was going to say, just as a counterexample, because I'm playing Dishonored 2 right now, it's like I reload a lot in Dishonored 2, right? Because I'm dying a lot, right? It's not a forgiving game. If you're, you have, at least the way I'm playing. So it's, you have to be pretty careful, and it's pretty lethal, and very, very opposite in that regard.
Yeah, for sure. Let's, I was going to say, turn to feedback. We're getting close on time. I guess we can, maybe
I guess we're going to do a bonus episode.
We're going to do a bonus episce. We can do a bunch then. That would be fine.
We'll do like half and half or something.
Yeah, let's aim to do that then. That seems fine. In that case, we will wind down the show. We love our reviews and email to send to devgameclub@gmail.com. We're going to try to get to a bunch of that next time. We did actually also have a review this week, so I look forward to reading that next week on the air. We generally get all the ones for Apple Podcasts, but if you put it in on some other app or what have you, some other infrastructure, just let us know, and maybe send us our way, or let us know where it is, and we'll try to get to those as well. We love hearing from you. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com, or on Twitter at devgameclub, where I've been forgetting to mention that we have a show out each week now that I'm working. And you can also find my co-host there at
Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
You are currently streaming Control on Twitch, I believe, yes?
Yes, I am still, I am quite a few sessions in. I don't know.
Where are you at now? What are you doing in Control?
I was anticipating you asking me that, and I'm blanking on. So I went through research. I did that whole section
Central research.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I got the woman that you're meeting there. I've met her. And she's, I guess, one of the researchers that worked with Darling. So, I guess I'm looking for him right now. So I finished that section. Yeah, I finished that section, and now I'm kind of heading back to executive. So I don't remember my exact objective, but I think it might have something to do with Darling. But trying to find him or something like that. But yeah, still a lot of mysteries for sure. And I'm still definitely enjoying it. And I think the game, from a gameplay perspective, is growing on me, because I'm getting more and more basically superpowers, right?
Right.
That's, I think, where the game shines, when you're using those all in kind of conjunction with each other. But but still, I think I mainly like it for the world and the story and the crazy weirdness of it. It's just such a weird setting. Yeah.
I would agree with that. I mean, I don't think the combat ever gets totally amazing. In fact, there were a couple times towards the end of the game where I turned on, there's accessibility options, and I basically turned on and said, hey, you know what? For this next little bit, just make me invincible or whatever. And they say, hey, this isn't the experience we intended, and I'm like, that's fine. I'm not enjoying the experience you intended anymore, so I'm gonna turn that off and go, and then I would turn it back on afterwards. So it's just like for a couple sections where I was like, okay, I've now done this 3 times, and I'm, there's just certain things that it doesn't do super well, and that I feel like you died cheaply, and you're like, but I'm glad you're enjoying it. So I would say I was very much in the same sort of camp.
I mean, it's funny to talk about Control and at the same time as playing BioShock, right? Because both games have such a great sense of like and I haven't finished Control yet, but just such a fully realized world, and setting and context and fiction, and like just Control is just blowing my mind as far as how well they did with that stuff. So cool. Yeah. So I will. I'm about to go play now. Although you'll be listening to this in the future, so you will not. Well,
go check out his VODs or subscribe so that you can get the notifications.
There you go. There you go.
Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Evers, and our logo is by Mark Garcia. Have fun needling your enemies this week, and good night.
Good night.